Hello, good evening, everyone. This is Doro once again, and today we're going to be working on this very simple calculator. We're going to be doing a simple calculator program. Nothing much, nothing complicated here. Understand? We've done this before. Some of us in computer science, we've actually done this before, but we did it using C programming, and in that kind of scenario, we didn't really build a UI for it. But in this case, we're going to be using a UI interface to actually do this. Now, if you look at the screen, you just see a simple calculator, right? And if I click any of the buttons, you notice nothing happens. Okay, nothing really happens here. This is just HTML and CSS, nothing else, nothing fancy, very casual. Okay, so if I take you to my VS Code, so we have our index.html right here, dead simple, which is just regular HTML with the title, event, calculator program. Then I linked my CSS file right here. And then a simple container, just a normal convention. I didn't even use the container to do anything. And then a calculator div, which wraps the entire calculator. And then this output container, which contains an input tag instance. This is where the output is actually going to be. And if you notice, I set it to disable so that one cannot type into it. You can't actually edit and type into it. Okay, so I gave it a class of output, a name of output, although this is not necessary, and a type of number. This also could have been text, but I chose to use number for some reason. And probably will change it to text as we go along, so you see the effect. Okay, and so underneath that we have the button container. This is the div that actually contains all the buttons. Okay, and within it we have different rows. A div called with a class of row, and inside it we have several buttons. Okay, so each row has a maximum of 4 buttons. So this one is 4 buttons, 4 just like that, all the way down to the last one, which has just 3 buttons. Okay, and so if I open the CSS file, a dead simple CSS file. These are normal CSS variable, and then I did a little bit of CSS reset, setting the box sizing to border box, then the body, blah 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 blah, and all the rest. Don't worry, all of this code is going to be on GitHub. For those of you that don't really know much about GitHub, please go and find that. Okay, so I'm going to push the code to GitHub so you can actually get access to it. And then our app.js, which is the JavaScript file, is totally empty. I've not even linked it to the HTML. So if I go back to my index.html, at the end of all the tags, I can just include my script tag, open and close, script. My test editor normally autocompletes. I don't know what happened. Okay, so the source is going to be app.js, dead simple. This is how we link our JavaScript file to our HTML, and we've done this severally before. So let me split screen, then put my JavaScript here. Place this. Split. Open. Close this. Okay, so I can close the tab that side now by pressing Ctrl B. Okay, so we have both the HTML and the JavaScript open side by side. So to test it, if it's properly linked, you know the drill. Console.log hello world, dead simple. So we can save this, go back to the browser, refresh, and we get hello world here. So we get hello world right here. Okay, so hello world has been displayed, which means our JavaScript file is properly linked. Okay, so now today we're going to be talking about events. Now the question is, what are events? Events are just simply actions that tell JavaScript that an incident has actually occurred. You know events normally in real world is where something is actually happening, abi, where the main for the, you understand? Okay, so in JavaScript, events simply trigger a certain code. Events are meant to trigger a certain code. They tell us a piece of code that something has happened, and so that code will respond to that event. Okay, so events are quite easy to handle in JavaScript. They are dead simple. Okay, first and foremost, events are tied to HTML elements or the DOM itself. So for us to listen or handle an event, we first have to target an element on the DOM. Okay, so in this scenario, in this case, I'm going to target this first button right here. I'm going to target it, and so to accomplish that, I just simply need to say const btn is equal to document dot query selector and then dot button. Okay, so button is the class. Each and every one of the buttons has this class of button. Okay, but query selector is not going to grab them all. It's going to grab the first one it finds, which is this one here that has C inside of it. Okay, so I can save it, and to prove that we only got one, let's log it through the console, save, then go back to the browser and refresh. You see we only get the first button right here. Okay, it's been highlighted over there. Dead simple. So we don't need this. Now, to handle an event, one of the most common events we normally handle in JavaScript is the click event. Okay, so the click event is the most common event. And what is this click event? See, when I click something, that's a click event. Okay, when I click, press the mouse down, that's a click event. Okay, it's just like if we go back to the browser and I click a button, you will notice, see, this click event is making it go down. All right, now that's not JavaScript, that's just CSS. This event here is being handled by CSS. Okay, so that event is what we want to try to handle in JavaScript. So it's dead simple. Just say btn dot add event listener, and then you pass in a string which determines the type of event we want to handle. And in this case, we want to handle the click event. And then the second parameter we'll pass in is a function. It's called a callback function, because callback functions are functions that are being executed, that are being called within another function. Okay, so I can pass in an arrow function here, and then I can write any code that I like within this function. I can just say console.log hello world, and then save, go back to the browser, then refresh. See, nothing happens, right? Because the event has not been fired yet. But if I click the button, you see we get the hello world. So it happens on click, you get. So it waits for that event. When the event is triggered, it executes the code. So you understand the basic process. Click, event is fired, and then some certain code is executed. Okay, it's that simple. There's no special thing about it. Very easy. Anybody can do this. Even my 2-year-old nephew does these things. Very easy. Okay, so now this callback function right here, what I specified here, is an anonymous arrow function. It can be any function. You can use the function declaration, use the function expression, whichever one that you deem fit to use. You can even define the function right here. I can just do const, let's call it callback. Let's see if I even spell it correctly. Then let's cut this from here, paste it right here. Okay, and just put in callback. Call is supposed to be double L, but anyhow, doesn't matter. JavaScript does not know English. Okay, so you don't call the function yourself by doing this. If you do this, you are already calling the function. We don't want to do that. We want the event listener to call the function that is called within another one. That's the callback. Okay, so we are passing it in as a callback because we are not the one to call it. Rather, this guy is going to do the calling for us. You understand? Okay, so if I save, go back to the browser and then refresh, okay, our event listener has been set up. So if I click, we get our hello world. Dead simple. Okay, no stress, no complication here. Anybody can do this. Understand? You understand? Yes, I believe you do understand. Okay, so is there anybody that would like to ask a question? Because I'm actually on the chat right now. If you feel okay, there's something you want to know about, you can type it before I continue. Okay, nobody's saying anything, so I can proceed. Alright, so now, how do we then use this our advantage in order to implement this whole calculator program? First thing first, we need a reference to each of these buttons, right? And then attach an event listener to whenever each one is being clicked, and then execute a certain piece of code when that happens, right? Yes. So I'm very sure by now you're already having a mental picture of what we're meant to do. So it's just that simple. Attach event listener when it is being triggered, then perform the action. That simple. Okay. So let's try it out. Abi? So now, how do we get a reference to each of these buttons? The easiest way, or the layman approach, which most persons will do, is to come here, give this an ID. Let's say we'll call this BTN 7, and then come here. We then do const BTN 7. It's going to be equal to document the get element by ID, and then we'll pass in BTN-7. I'm very sure some of you have seen this before. Okay, and then underneath you can do BTN7 dot add event listener. Then we'll listen for the click event, if I can spell, and then we'll pass in our callback, which can be an anonymous function, either arrow or regular anonymous function. Then console.log click 7. Okay, so save, go back to the browser, refresh. Okay, we get an error because I did not save the HTML. So let's go over here and then save, come back, go to the browser, refresh. Okay, so our event has been set up. Click 7, event is fired, right? Okay, now it will have occurred to you that we would have to do this for each and every one of these buttons, and that is very, very cumbersome. There's a better approach. Okay, so the better approach is one of the data structures in JavaScript, which we discussed about, arrays. Because now we want to store multiple values, right? We want to grab all the buttons that has to do with numbers all at once, store them in an array, loop through that array, then attach an event handler to each one of them. That's simple, right? So how do we accomplish this? It's very simple. So we need to add a class that is common to all. So let me get rid of this ID, we don't need it anymore. So I need to attach a class that is common to all the buttons that are just numbers, and it's that simple. Okay, so let me just put a cursor in each and every one of them. Here, 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 here. Well, let me just attach the decimal point as well, and then we'll call it button dash number. Okay, so all the numbers have a class called button dash number. So I can grab them all. I can do const button, or rather number btns, because they're going to be many, document dot query selector, or not query selector, then we want the dot button dash number. Okay, and then underneath you can just simply console dot log number button. So if I save this, okay, save everything, and then go back to the browser, refresh, see we get a node list, and I'm very sure you know what this is because we've actually talked about the node list in one of our previous classes. Okay, so we have 11 buttons here. Okay, so which is all the buttons that has to do with numbers, including the decimal point. Okay, so we have all the buttons here. Now we need to look through each of these buttons. Okay, so I will just say numbers dot for each. For each is an array method which allows us to look through each element of an array. But since a node list is like an array, it supports some of these functions that arrays use. Okay, so we pass in a callback, but this callback automatically takes in an input, at least an input, and that input is the current item that is being iterated. So at this point in time, I'm using the arrow syntax. So I didn't put parentheses around this because when you're accepting only one parameter into an arrow function, you don't need to put parentheses around it. Okay, so you just specify the name of the parentheses, then the arrow, and then the curly brace, open and closing curly brace. Okay, so now this item is actually the buttons themselves. So if I do a console.log once again, rather item, which would even be better named buttons, not item. So I can just say button instead, and then log button. Okay, so I forgot you guys in the browser. I'm really sorry about that. It's kind of difficult to remember to always switch back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Anyways, we'll move on. So what I just simply did was query all the buttons with a class of button dash number, and then we're looping through the buttons. Okay, so for each of these buttons, we are accepting the button, one button, okay, and then logging it to the console right here. Dead simple. Okay, so if I go to the browser and then refresh, see we get each of the buttons being logged separately. Okay, each of them being logged separate. So now at this point in time, we can now attach an event listener to it, just like we did to the single button that we target. So I can just do click and then pass in the callback, and then simply console the log button clicked. Okay, so if I save, go back to the browser, refresh, we don't get anything, right? So wait for the event. I click 6, button clicked. I click 0, button clicked. Dot, button clicked. 5, button clicked. Instance. So each of these buttons now have an event handler attached to them. Okay, but if I click these ones, nothing happens because an event has not been attached to these guys. Okay, so let's proceed. We're making progress, right? Yes, we are. Now, how do we know which button is for 1, or which one is for 2, or which one is for 3, or which one is for 4? One thing we can do and just do console.log btn.inner test, okay, which is the test content within it. Okay, so oh my goodness, so I just added this line and removed the console.log of the buttons and then added them button.inner test right here. Okay, so if we go back to the browser and then refresh, we don't get anything because browser is waiting for the event. I'm going to write as JavaScript waiting for the event. So if I click 9, we get 9, right? Because what is inside is actually 9. If I click 5, we get 5. 7, 0, dot. Okay, so each of these buttons are now working. But then there's a problem with this approach. Some designs may not really involve you putting the test directly inside. Some of them might actually require the designer using font. For instance, it might use some kind of crazy font, which will not actually be the number 7, probably an image that has 7 in order to make it more stylish. In that kind of scenario, this won't work because then it will not be a number, it will be an icon. Okay, so the best approach or the better approach is not to use the inner test. Okay, so is to set, the best approach is to set a data attribute on the buttons themselves. Okay, so you just need to say data dash number right here, then set this equal to 7. Okay, so this data attribute is actually a custom attribute that you can set yourself. Okay, it's not tied to any special thing about the HTML element. Okay, so it's programmer defined. This part is predefined, data dash is predefined, but this other part, which I called number, is programmer defined. You can call it anything. You can even call it data dash duro right here. Same thing, it's still going to work just fine. It's a custom attribute. Okay, but then JavaScript is going to gain access to that custom attribute and use its value rather than the inner test of the button. So that way, no matter what the inner test is, whether they change it to icons, whether they use normal test, it will still work just fine. Okay, so you can just copy this, then please call source all the places I need. Let me be here, 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 okay, here, 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 and here. Okay, so space, Control V. So I pasted data 7 everywhere. This has to be 8. This has to be 9. This has to be 4. This has to be 5. Sorry about that. Somebody's trying to call me on WhatsApp. This has to be 6. Okay. This has to be 1. This has to be 2. This has to be 3. Okay. This has to be 0. Very tedious. Programmers like very repetitive. Okay, so this has to be dot. Okay, so we have everything set up in our HTML. Now what is left is accessing it in the JavaScript, and it's very simple. You just simply, once the data attribute has been defined, you can access that in JavaScript by referencing the data set attribute of the element. You understand? Since we're looping through each one, the element itself has an attribute called data set, which is going to reference this guy. It's referring to this guy, and then whatever we attach to this other part becomes another attribute within the data set, which I can call dot number. Okay, so btn the data set dot number is referring to this, because you can have more than one data attribute. I can have another one, and another one. And when I want to reference this paper, let's say I have data dash action or data dash rejection equal to something. Okay, so if I want to reference that, it will be btn dot dataset dot that name, which could be action. You understand? In order to reference it. Okay, so if I save this and then we return to the browser and refresh, what just happened? Something altered my code. I must have duplicated the values. Yes. Okay, so the code has been duplicated. For some reason, how did I make that mistake? Alright, so I made a mistake of duplicating the code. So now I have to delete one. I don't think I have to delete one. I have to undo. It's a lot of damage has been done right there. Okay, so back to this point. So I have to type all that again. Wow, where I found it. Okay, so right here, let's put multiple cursors all at once. So we can just get this over with. Okay, here. Oh, not there. Here. Get out. Excuse me. Here. Here. And here. Okay, so space data dash number and set this equal to a string. This point, this will be 7, 8, 9, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm not done. 0, and then our decimal point. So we can save this. JavaScript code remains the same, nothing changes over there. Okay, so if we go back to the browser, we still have this now everything is back to normal. I duplicated the buttons, that's why everything just twists to one side. So if I click it doesn't work. Okay, what did I do wrong? Where is the error? So for each button we add listening the button. Damn it, it's spelling error. This is part of the stress that we normally get as developers. Sometimes you just get one unusual error somewhere, and then you keep wondering where is this error coming from. Okay, so let's debug a little bit. Console.log will be great. Just checking if the event is being fired. If I refresh, click. Okay, the event is not being fired. Okay. So what's up with that? Wow, JavaScript file is being linked right here. Okay. Oh, yes. I removed all the classes that has to do with ETN numbers. They are not here. Okay, so we have to add them as well. Very stressful. Okay. This is one of the advantage of live coding. You get to see, you get an unpolished kind of tutorial. You understand? Where you see errors, you see how to debug it and all the rest. Unlike if I'm meant to actually do this pre-recorded, of course I will just fix this behind the scene and then record again. You won't even see it happen. Okay, so but when it's live stream, I can't really cut those things out. They are just there. All right, so we save. Let's keep our fingers crossed and hope it works this time. Go back to the browser and refresh. If I click, oh yes, it worked. We get 9. Okay, so let's take out something. Some extra line is not needed. Okay, so as at this point in time, you see now that we're actually getting reference to these buttons right here. If for any reason, let's say the design requires some kind of French or Roman numeral pattern, understand that it's actually like this. Okay, something like this. And then I save. Excuse me. And then I save. Okay. And then let me save. Go back to the browser and then refresh. You see we have 90 in here, but if I click, it's still 7. Okay, so what's in here doesn't affect the data that is being returned right here. You understand? Okay, I'm very sure you understand. So the next thing, now that we're already having reference to this, let me remove that 90. Remove it from here. Control Z. It is supposed to be 7. Perfect. Okay, so now that we have the values, we're getting them one after the other. The next thing is to actually display them in the I don't know the name. Let me show you. In this place, this field right here, so we need to display it here. The display unit in here. So as we type, it should be displayed over there. Okay, so how do we accomplish this? It's very simple. First thing first, we need a reference to it. Okay, so this is the input field that we're using here. It's an input field. I think I've explained what it does. Just type of number with some output, and then it's being disabled so you can't actually type into it. Okay, or user can't actually type into it. Okay, so to reference it, we need this class called output. So all I just need to do is, let's call it display, and set it equal to document dot query selector. Don't need the query selector, or we just need the selector, and then we'll target output. Okay, we've gotten a reference to this guy. Okay, now I can just right here do display. Now form elements, or form input, form elements basically have the dot value property. Okay, value, sorry, they have this dot value property, which allows us access to the current data that is within it. Okay, if I should log it to the console at this point in time, if I do a console.log display the value, this is an input element, that's the value, but this is a button. Buttons do not have dot value, divs do not have dot value, only form elements have dot value. Okay, so when you reference a form element, this dot value attribute is available and gives you access to the data within it. So let's save and then return back to the browser and see what we'll get. Empty, nothing. It doesn't output anything. It's empty at this point in time. This 0 you see right here is just a placeholder. In my code, I set the placeholder to be 0. Okay, that's what it's displaying there. So what we need to do is to declare a variable called current input, and then set it to 0. And then somewhere around here, I'm going to do display dot value is going to be equal to current input. Okay, so that way the current input, the display, the value of the input field in the HTML is going to be set to 0 initially. Okay, so down here we can set the value of display to be equal to button dot dataset dot number. Okay, quite tedious to type, I'm not going to lie. So let's go back to the browser and then refresh. Nothing happens, remember, because it's actually expecting an event to occur first before it will execute those set of instructions that we just put. If I click 2, see we get 2 right there. I click 5, changes to 5, 6 changes to 6, 7 changes to 7, 0 point, changes to point, and you see we get this error here. Okay, this error is coming as a result of the type which I set the HTML input field to. Okay, so I actually set the type to be number. So if the value which we are setting here is not a number, it's going to throw an error. Okay, so since we just need this to be a display unit, you can set it to test, like regular test. So this one does not have constraint. If the type is test, doesn't have constraint. Okay, so that was what I was trying to tell you guys previously. So if we refresh now, then I press the decimal point to show up 0, show up 2, show up 5, show up just like that. Understand? Okay. Alright, but that's not what we want, right? We want if we press 2 and then 5, it should be displaying 25, right? Okay, so how do we accomplish this? What we really want to do is to concatenate these values. Okay, so when it is 2, concatenate. When it's 3, concatenate, right? So the trick is to keep concatenating to this current input right here. So I can just do current input plus equals. I don't want to sum it. Okay, I want to concatenate a string value to it. So in order to make this work, turn this guy to a string and then concatenate X, Ctrl V, that guy right there. Okay, so we're saying that concatenate to this current input the value of the button that we just clicked, or rather the number in the data set of the button that was just clicked. Okay, so instead of putting this right here, we just need to specify current input. Dead simple, very, very simple. So let's bring this down. Okay, so save, return to the browser, refresh. Nothing happens, of course, until we click. We now have 0, 9. Okay, fix that in due time. But if you notice, as we keep clicking, keeps adding numbers to it. Okay, keeps adding more numbers. Understand? So we've actually solved the first part of the problem. So now let's solve this new problem that we just created, which is that 0 issue that is there. Okay, so how do we fix this? It's very simple. When it is 0, you set the current value to be the display value. Okay, but if it's not 0, you concatenate to it. Do you understand? Yes, I know you understand. So it's that simple. First, we check if current input is equal to the string 0. If it is, then we just want the current input to be equal to this guy. Ctrl X, Ctrl V. Okay, otherwise it's not 0, we then concatenate. Okay, so can copy this, paste it, and then add the plus symbol right here. This is just a shorthand for current input is equal to current input plus btn dot data set. Wonderful. Data set dot number. So it's just a shorthand for this. Okay, this is a shorthand for this, so I don't want to type this very long. Understand? So plus is used for concatenation in JavaScript. Okay, plus symbol is used for concatenation, so I'm just basically concatenating to the current input. Okay, so if we save and then return to the browser and refresh, because we need to load in the new JavaScript every time. Okay, if I press 0, it doesn't change it, right? If I press 2, you now have to 0 as to 3.563. Beautiful, right? Yes, I know you love it. Very interesting. Okay, so far we solved this part, right? We can now type in the numbers as our heart so desires. Now let's work on these action buttons. Okay, so I'm going to start with going to target all the action buttons, and then you know what we need to do now. So let's just go and do it. Okay, so back here in VS Code, so we need to target all our action buttons, and remember they have a class in common, which is this btn dash action. All the action buttons have that in common. Okay, so remember the pattern we're following. We simply say const action btns, then set this equal to document dot query selector all dot button dash action. Wonderful. Action. Rotate. Alright, so next thing is to loop through each and every one of them. So we do action btns dot for each. That's simple. For each btn, what do you want to do? We want to take the btn and then attach an event listener, and the event is going to be a click event, and when this is fired, we want to call a function, because this anonymous function is a callback to be executed when the button has been clicked, and then we just console.log action. Okay, so let's test it to be sure that it's actually working. Alright, so if we refresh, everything has been cleared, and then if I click X, action, right? Action, hit action. Understand? So if you notice, this number is increasing when you, same value is being logged to the console. It doesn't have put it on separate lines, rather it starts changing this count close to it right here. Yeah, that's what it does. Okay, so let's go back to VS Code. We're not done yet. So now we need to know which of these buttons, or which type of action button we're referencing. Okay, and the trick is still the same thing that we did right here. This btn dataset number, because we can't use the inner text, because this could be an image or an icon or something, just to make it more stylish. You understand? Okay, so let's do that. That's simple. Let me add cursor to these places and then do data dash action. That's what I'm going to call this action. I'm going to set this equal to a string. Okay, so for the first one, the action is just going to be C. Second one CE. The last one, I'm going to put the percentage symbol, or rather second to last, and then the last one /. But there's more. We have the X right here. So I'm going to do data dash action, then this is going to be equal to X. Okay, rather let me use star. Okay, so then we have the subtraction right here, data dash action, and then put hyphen in there to symbolize the subtraction. Then data dash action, we put an addition, and then the last one, which is data action, this is going to be the equal to. Okay, so let's save the HTML first. So back to JavaScript. To reference those guys, dead simple, right? I'm very sure you know how to do this. btn dot dataset dot action, dead simple. Okay, so it's similar to what we've done here before. Okay, but this time instead of number, we call these ones data dash number, so it's going to be dataset dot number. But this one, we call it data dash action, so it's going to be dataset dot action. You understand the difference, right? Yes, I know you do. I know you're too smart to not understand it. Alright, so we'll refresh. Then if I click C, we get C, CE, percentage equal to, right? Yes, that's all we get. Okay, so now let's proceed. What's the next thing that we need to do? Now we've successfully grabbed the numbers, right? Yes, into the current input. And then once an operator is being clicked, you know how the normal markets calculator works. Once an operator is clicked, immediately what is displayed disappears, first of all, and then the previous value that was entered is stored somewhere. Then you enter your current value and then press equal to, then everything is being was evaluated, right? Right. So what we need is an accumulator. So say let accumulator be equal to 0. Okay, so we need something to be holding the accumulator. All right, so right here, what do we need to do? First thing first, we need to let me pull out the value. Let's call it action. Say this equal to btn dot data set dot action. Okay, so I need to pull it out into a variable so it will be easy for me to reference later on. So what do we need to do? We need to test what the value of that action actually is. Okay, you can use either the if statement or switch statement. Okay, so we've already used the if statement before, so let me try the switch statement. I don't think I've used it in any of our program before now, so I'm going to use the switch statement just to get some certain things done. So we're going to switch action, okay, and then let's start with addition. So when it is addition, what do we want to do? Okay, I know you know what we have to do. First thing first, we need to take the current input and store it in the accumulator. So accumulator plus equals current input. Any confusion? No. Now this is going to be kind of a problem because current input stores a string, but accumulator, we don't need it to hold a string. Okay, so the way one way to pass the value is to wrap it inside this function called number, okay, or rather number constructor. So what this will do to take a string and then return a number. This is a number constructor in JavaScript. Okay, it's there by default. Okay, the reason why I use number is because the number can either be an integer or a floating point number. So I don't want to do pass int because we also have that in JavaScript. We have pass int. But what this will do is take a string and convert it to an integer. Okay, but on the other hand, number will take a string and convert it to the relevant number data type or number pattern. I don't even know the word to use that it falls into. You understand? So it doesn't just cast it to one particular type. We have pass int, we also have pass float. You understand? These are the only two passing that we have. And then number. Number takes and return the appropriate. You understand? Whether it is int or float. You grab, Abby. Yes, I know you grab. I know you grab. So it's going to take what is in the accumulator and then add this to it. Okay, understand? Yes, I know you understand. Although we're going to modify this. In fact, there's no need to add. We set it to that current value, but the number representation of the current value. Okay, so once that is done, we can now set our current input back to 0, or rather the string 0, and then set the displayed of value to the current value. Then what else? What else do we need to do? We break out of this switch statement. Okay, so this is just for plus. So our default console log, let's just say undefined action. Okay, just in case an action that has not been captured is being triggered here. Okay, so let's save this first. Go back to the browser, refresh, and let's see if it works. So if I type 89, then click plus, you see it turns back to 0, right? Yes, because it has actually done what we asked it to do. You understand? So the next one I'll do before I do the other ones is the equal to case equal to, right? So in this one, what do we need to do? We need to evaluate, right? Once the equal to has been clicked, we need to evaluate, we need to come up with a result. So at this point, we need a variable to hold the result. So say let result equal to 0, just to start. And then in here, we simply say result is now going to be equal to accumulator. Yes, I just missed something. Okay, so now when the equal to is being clicked, how do we know which operation to execute in order to evaluate the result? Okay, for us to be able to do that, we need a variable that keeps track of the operator that has been chosen. So we're going to initially set this to null. So once the equal to has been clicked, first of all, we need to know which operator is that. So we check if operator is equal to plus, then let's move up. Let's move this in here. Our result is going to be equal to the accumulator plus passing to number of the current input. Okay, and then we set the display of the current input to result. Set the display to result. Okay, and then we need to reset a lot of things. We need to set current input back to 0, set operator back to null. Okay, what else do we need to reset? Accumulator back to 0. Okay, so basically that's it. Okay, so let's say go back to the browser, refresh. So all I'm doing at this point in time is just ensuring that the addition functionality actually works. So if I do 23 plus 5, then click equal to, okay, we'll get undefined action. Okay, yes, that is because we did not change the value of the operator when we press the yeah, right here. So right here we're supposed to set operator to be equal to plus. Okay, so we need to change the value of the operator to match what was just executed. Okay, so if I save, go back to the browser, refresh, and then let's go again. 23 plus assignment to constant variable. Oh my goodness. So I set it as a constant. I declared it as a constant. Wonderful. Okay, so operator was declared as a constant rather than a variable. So it's supposed to be let, not const. Another error again. Ha, shit. I don't know what's wrong today, if it's hunger, if it's, I don't even know. So we refresh. 23 plus 5 is equals to 28. Whew, it worked. Well, tell me congratulations. Yes, thank you very much. Okay, so now I just want to make this a little bit better because it just shows 28. I'm not really sure if that's the solution. So what I came up with is, okay, so when it's time to display the result, I just simply use backtest because this is something I've not really showed you guys. It's called a template literal, and then answer equal to $, curly brace, and then close it, and then close the backtest. Okay, so backtest is called a template literal. Okay, so we use it to insert variables directly inside a string. Instead of concatenating, we just use this. Makes it a whole lot easier. Before now, we actually put this first part in single or double quotes, then use the plus operator and then the variable in order to concatenate. But ESC, so use the template literal to actually do that. Okay, so if I save and then go back to the browser, refresh. Okay, so we'll do 25. Wahala day 98 day. Okay, so where did I make a mistake again? Okay, so I did it inside this on click, which is not where it is supposed to happen. Sorry about that. Okay, it's supposed to happen right here where we get the result. So it's backticks answer is equal to $, curly brace, close the other side variable with the closing curly brace, and then backticks once again, and have to close it up. So this is where I'm supposed to actually do it, not over there. So if I save, go back to the browser, refresh, so 25 plus 5 is equal to 30. Wonderful. Okay, so we're making progress, right? Yes. Okay, so far you've seen how we actually make this calculator work, Abi. So I just did the addition operation. I'm not going to do the other ones, division, multiplication, and subtraction. I believe you now know what to do, and I believe you can do the rest yourself. Okay, so the only one I'm going to try to do at this point, or the other two I'll do, is this C and this CE. Okay, so C is meant to erase one value from the string, or from the input rather, to take out one value. And then CE is meant to clear the whole thing. CE should be easy to implement. Okay, so, or rather, let me do CE and then you do C. What do you think? Yeah, I trust you guys to actually put the whole thing into action. Okay, so it's that simple. This is where it's meant to happen, right here. Okay, so we just simply do, and don't forget, put your break statement after this whole action. So when it is equal to, check if operator is addition, then, as a matter of fact, all of this don't have to be in here. You can actually take it out and put it here. Okay, so it's not tied to any conditional statement, because if you do that, you'll have to keep repeating this whole process for each one. But when in true sense, all we just want to do is evaluate this. Okay, so it's that simple now. I'm very sure you understand. So let's see if everything is still working as expected. If I go back to the browser, refresh, then do our 23 plus 6 is equals to 29. Perfect. Everything is still working, right? So what I need to do now is this guy. Once I click this button, okay, something is supposed to happen. I'm supposed to clear this whole thing that's here and reset it back to 0. Okay, so let's try it out. I'm very sure you know what to do. We just need to add one more case right here. We just need to check for case CE, because that's what we set the data action to be. Where is it? Here, CE. So check for case CE, and then what instructions do you want to execute? It's very simple. Okay, for case CE, you want to reset everything. You want to reset everything. Okay, so I don't need this. I just need to set it back to current input, but then it can't be above, it has to be beneath it. Cool. So CE just simply resets everything back to default, and then after that we need to take a break. Yes, you understand? Yes, I know you understand. Okay, so save this. That's simple. CE is meant to clear the whole thing. Okay, so take it back to the default state. And if you come to the top, this is the default state, right? Okay, I think one more thing is missing, which is result. So we take result back to 0, although this is not necessary because result is always being reinitialized. It is a destructive operation that occurs here. Okay? Destructive in the sense that previous value is replaced and not reused or not used. So okay, so you understand the whole process, right? So if we save and go back to the browser and then refresh, okay, so let's try something. 3 plus 9 is equals to this, and then when I click CE, everything resets back to default. Even if I do 23 plus, then I click CE, okay, so this 0 that is here, this is a problem that I need to fix. Okay, so let me fix this one. I'm going to fix this 0 problem right here, and then we'll call it a day, because I think we've actually exhausted more than an hour on this. So in our next class, I'm going to improve on this code that we've written today. Okay, so let's go back to VS Code. So how do we improve that? Okay, so the problem comes here when we click on if it is 0. Okay, I already fixed it right here. So the problem is here. Yes, it's not supposed to be 0, but the string value 0. That's what it means to be. String value 0. Okay, because if it's not a string, this will not work. You see, I use the triple equal to here. Okay, so there's a difference between the double equal to whatever and the triple equal to. So let's test it in the console so you know what I mean. If I do the number 0 double equals 0, we get true. Okay, because this double equals only evaluates the value, doesn't evaluate the data type. But if I do 0 triple equals the string 0, we get false, because this does not just check the value, but it also checks the data type. And this is an integer, or rather a number, because JavaScript doesn't really have integer. This is a number and this is a string. So for that reason, they are not equal. Okay, so that was the current input. We set it to an integer. Okay, and then the condition that is meant to test if it's 0, it's checking if the string 0 is actually inside the current input. Okay, so it was false, so therefore to concatenate. That's what it did here. It was executing this. I don't want to bore you or where you out. We've written a lot of code here today, and then in our next class we'll continue on improving calculator program. So let's call it a day, or not yet.